All right. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar, Leveraging Cross-Systems Approaches to Advance Racial Equity. We are very grateful to have such a diverse group of professionals with us today, especially as we explore how collaboration across systems can advance racial equity in the youth legal systems. Your role in shaping policies and practices that impact young people is critical, and we really appreciate your time and engagement in this very important conversation. Um, so before we dive into today's discussion, I want to take a moment just to introduce ourselves. I'm Amber Farn. I'm the Deputy Director for Certificate Programs here at the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. We're a research center housed under Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy. And here at CJJR, our mission is to support and equip leaders across youth serving systems with the knowledge and skills and strategies needed to drive meaningful system transformation that improves outcome for young people and their communities. And we do so through a combination of training, technical assistance, practice models, leadership networks, and research. And our work primarily focus on a few key areas such as the certificate programs, which is our intensive training programs that bring together multidisciplinary teams from across the country to focus on critical challenges in the field of youth justice and child serving systems. These programs cover a wide range of topics, including crossover youth, probation, youth in custody, supporting system-involved LGBTQ plus youth, diversion, school justice, and advancing racial justice. We provide teams with tools to create actionable system transformation efforts in their communities. And a key component of our certificate program is the Capstone Project, where teams develop and implement local reform efforts with ongoing support from us. You'll be hearing from two jurisdictions, New Rochelle, New York, and Lancaster County, New York today, both of whom are fellows of our Advancing Racial Justice and Equity and Youth Legal System Certificate Program from 2023. So if y'all are interested in engaging work similar to the work we discussed today, we are holding the 2025 Advancing Racial Justice and Equity and Youth Legal System Certificate Program in DC this year in June, and applications are open through the end of March. My colleagues can share the link in the chat if anyone is interested. And beyond training, we also lead other development and implementation efforts, such as the crossover youth practice model and youth in custody practice model, both of which provide hands-on intensive local support for communities focused on each of these topics. As I mentioned earlier, we also have leadership networks such as the Juvenile Justice Leadership Network and the Public Information Officers Learning Collaborative. So we believe that no single system can meet the needs of young people and families alone. And that's why we have a strong focus on multi-system collaboration, helping agencies to work together across youth justice, child welfare, education, behavioral health, and beyond. So today's conversation is an opportunity to highlight real-world strategies and insight, like I mentioned before, from New Rochelle, New York, and Lancaster County, New York. Lancaster County, Nebraska, and New Rochelle, New York. And today we're focusing on practical cross-sector strategies to improve outcomes for young people. Our panelists will share their approaches to ensuring all youth have access to effective programming, strengthening collaboration, and navigating challenges along the way. I say that fully recognizing the conversation about equity can be complex in today's environment. But regardless of our perspectives, the strategy we discussed today are about improving outcomes for all young people and ensuring that systems are responsive to the needs of the communities they serve. And our goal today is to focus on how cross-system collaboration, data-driven decision-making, and stakeholder engagement can help communities enhance fairness and effectiveness in their youth legal systems. We hope that the examples today will provide you with some practical takeaways that you can apply in your own work. And today's discussion will be very informal and conversational. There will be no slides, just a meaningful exchange of ideas and experiences. We'll begin with brief introductions, followed by discussion on the panelists' capstone projects or their local reform efforts, stakeholder engagement strategies, and communication efforts. We'll leave time for Q&A, and I highly encourage you all to submit questions you have along the conversation in the chat. And last but not least, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for taking the time out of your very busy day to share your experiences, and as well as our CJJR team to make this webinar possible. I encourage all of you to be active participants, ask questions, and reflect on how these strategies might work in your communities in the chat. And consider how collaboration across the system can support your communities. And so with that, I will turn it to Christine to introduce our panelists and kick off the discussion.
Thanks, Amber, and hi, everyone. My name is Christine Himowitz-Ganji. I work on CJJR certificate programs alongside Amber and our colleague Natasha Kinmont. My main role on the certificate program team is around the capstone projects. So I review each team's capstone project that they submit and work with our team to provide written feedback on those projects, as well as managing CJJR's Fellows Network. So that's a group of around 2,100 folks from across the country who have had a capstone project approved by CJJR. And all of our panelists today are fellows of the Advancing Racial Justice and Equity Certificate Program. So really excited to dive into this discussion. I will popcorn around for the panelists to introduce themselves if y'all don't mind. Laura, do you want to kick us off?
So my name is Laura Sewer. I am part of the Lancaster County out of Nebraska team. My role is, my title is assessment specialist. So I do risk assessments for kids entering our juvenile justice system and helps the county attorney's office determine if they want to file in court or offer diversion or just give it a warning. And my office then runs diversion if the youth gets up there. So I have some involvement in that part.
Thanks, Laura. Casey?
Yeah, I'm Casey Cargus. I'm the Executive Director of the Mediation Center. We're a community mediation center that works with the county. We have, you'll hear about Project Restore. We work with diversion and offering restorative justice practices as well as truancy for middle schoolers.
Thanks, Casey. Nate, do you want to go next?
Hello, my name is Nate Adams. I'm from the New Rochelle, New York capstone project YJET. I'm currently the director, program coordinator for the My Brother's Keeper initiative here in the city of New Rochelle, where I work directly and hands-on with our high school students and our middle school students, providing preventative opportunities for them, rearing them and keeping them away from the judicial system as we started to work with these students and starting to understand some of their trajectory and looking at a tier 3 or 3-tier project in which we engage and intervened with these students on a daily basis.
Thanks, Nate. And David.
Hi, my name is David Peters. I'm also with the New Rochelle Capstone team, and I'm a council person for the city of New Rochelle, serve on the Youth Advisory Board, and I'm primarily responsible for the integration of anti-racist training and development, particularly in relationship to this particular project and throughout the city of New Rochelle. So really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you all. We have lots of expertise from lots of different areas of youth serving systems on this panel, so I'm excited to jump in. If y'all don't mind, I will get us started with just a quick summary from each of y'all's teams about the work you've undertaken as part of your capstone project. For New Rochelle, the YJET initiative, and then for Lancaster County, the expansion of Project Restore. So the New Rochelle folks, would y'all kick us off?
So we were provided this great opportunity, and really what led to this capstone project. Councilman David Peters at that time was part of our city school district board of trustees, and we started to see and understand that we are witnessing a population of students through some of their traumatic backgrounds, through some of the challenges that they're facing within our community, that there was starting to become this pipeline, the synergy of moving towards the judicial system at a very early age. Really what kind of spearheaded a lot of this was a lot of the work that Mr. Peters was doing around anti-racism training and working with our police department, our city officials, and starting to gain a better understanding of why our students in these engagements are struggling to find community. Community comes from so many different angles, whether it's the municipality of your city, whether that's your police department, whether that's your school district, and the overall community in itself. And New Rochelle is a very, very unique city where it is very family rich. There's a lot of history here in New Rochelle that allows for us to do very unique work and very intentional work. And some of that intentional work really started about 4 years ago when our lead judge, Judge Jared Rice, took on the opportunity around creating for our rising adult population this early intervention for first-time offenders between the ages of 18 to 24. And that program was the OYP, the Opportunity Youth Park. That program really started the synergy of bringing community members together around mentorship, wellness plans, employment opportunities, really looking at some of our kids and their problems with substance abuse, and started to galvanize all of these community members around this 18 to 24-year-old population. But me, in the role that I play and working with school-age students, I said, wait, unfortunately, I knew a lot of those 18 to 24-year-olds, and how can we get into a preventative mindset prior to that? And when we started to really watch OYP and a lot of the different pieces that allowed for this community building to take place, Councilman Peters, Trustee Peters at that time said, you know what, there's this great opportunity. And he brought it to our superintendent then, Jonathan Raymond, to say, hey, we would love for the school district to be a part of this initiative. And from there, the legs just started to grow, and we found ourselves in this great community that consisted of our Boys and Girls Club, facility manager, Becky Mazanoble, myself with my brother's keeper. We had Officer Rob Johnson, who was then head of our PAC unit for our New Rochelle Police Department. We had the probations department with us and a great organization, the Center for Justice and Innovation, Marie Alamonte, helped us really start to spearhead what does this group look like. You know, time and resources. We always hear that, right? Do we have the time? Do we have the resources? But just this 1 week allow for us to really sit in a room, turn our cell phones off, and start to really galvanize on what are some of the focuses. What can we do to really start to hone in on these individuals and working with them? And from there, we created this 3-tier of populations that we knew we wanted to identify. At that point, we had a tier 3 group of over 40 young people between the ages of 12 to 17 that have engaged with New Rochelle Police Department, probation, and or family court. And many of these students, it wasn't just one-time offenders, it was multiple offenses. So we started to look at how can we engage with those students. And then from there, we started to hone in on a tier 2 population of students that were right there on the cusp. We know everything that falls in the middle sometimes doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And we knew that there was a middle ground of students that needed to be able to be identified that could go from one way to the other. What were some of those spearheaded data points that we looked at? 1, attendance in school. 2, academic performance. 3, social economic background and some of the challenges they're finding within their own family life. And then from there, we started to structure what we call the YJET project. I could go a little deeper into that, but I definitely wanted David Peters to be able to discuss some of the anti-racism work that he was doing that was going to lay a foundation for our community supports that we started to develop with our police department and our community at large.
Thank you, Nate. First of all, Nate, everybody needs a Nate. So if you're in Nebraska and you don't have a Nate, I'm going to say to you as you listen to him that part of our cross systems work in New Rochelle is because we have a Nate. Having said that, I kind of want to just briefly just add some additional stuff, but I want to show off a little bit too, and this gets to Nate. Just so that you know this as well. New Rochelle just won the New York State men's basketball title yesterday, so I want to show off of that. We just won that, and in New Rochelle, so I'm really happy about that. But to the anti-racist work and the like, this work to be effective really doesn't happen without a cross systems approach. And so the cross system approach will only have meaning if it takes into account the history of racism that has structurally and institutionally provided for some far more opportunities than it provides for others. And so in relationship to that, the integration of and the implementation of anti-racist work is critical for the youth that we're all here today to talk about. And the reasons that really lay a foundation for that is that if and when we have youth that we're engaged with, more often than not, our systems by and large are evaluating the behaviors of the youth and the youth alone. Part of what the cross-system work brings into focus and has brought into focus in our capstone is that when you actually begin to focus on cross-system work, meaning sharing the individual youth that you may be engaged with, or young child or young adult for that matter, it also requires, at a minimum, a two-generational look. And so with respect to that, when we think about anti-racist work, our focus has been to expand that anti-racist work, not only across the service provider spectrum, but also in relationship to community members in the various points of entry that they have as being residents within the city of New Rochelle. So having said that, we'll talk a little bit more as we move along, but that focus is really critically a part of what happens when individuals and agencies are involved with youth. Critically important that we expand that lens.
Awesome. Thank you both. And as we kind of dive deeper into things, I'd love to get deeper into the interventions y'all have done for high schoolers and middle schoolers and that specific community-based work, because I think it's so interesting. But thank y'all for that overview. Laura and Casey, what about for y'all in Lancaster County? Do you mind sharing what your capstone is focused on?
Yes, so I'll start us off. Our capstone project was expanding an existing project. We were lucky our community had sent another group to the CJJR certificate program back in, I think it was like 2015, to do the program. They had developed a program called Project Restore that's been pretty successful in our community. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that is, because our project was expanding that. So when that group went, one of the things that they looked is that they had looked at our data. So we had partners with our county attorney's office, our local police department, our school system, and then my office, Human Services, that runs diversion, and a couple other community partners. And they had found that one of the areas that they wanted to target sort of the rest points of whether it could be racial or ethnic disparities. And they noticed, pulling at our data, that assaults and disturbing the peace charges that happened at school were one of the largest areas where those disparities showed up. And so they wanted to create a project to target that. And so the project they came up with is Project Restore. And so the way it works is that a youth that gets an assault or disturbing peace that our local LPS, Lincoln Public Schools, then that gets eligible for the program. And then that case gets reviewed by the county attorney. And then we had some criteria to screen out. So if the youth had been on probation, or if they'd been on diversion, or if the incident seemed gang related, or if there's a sexual assault, the county attorney had certain checks that they would then, not let them do the program and then go through the normal route. But if they were eligible for the program, then they got referred to my office, where we wanted to implement a short-term, quick turnaround. So by the time the incident happened, we'd be calling them within probably less than 5 days to set up and get them enrolled in this program. Be a 60-day intervention. The idea to meet with the family, talk to them, and then refer them to Casey, which I'll let him talk to you in just a second about what they do. They do restorative justice work with the youth. And so if they complete the process, then the charge gets removed from the record completely. It doesn't count as a charge on the record. It doesn't count as a diversion thing that they've gone through. So that way, you're helping to keep our youth from going further into the juvenile justice system. So this has been a program that's been pretty successful in our community. Like I said, it started running towards the end of 2015. Our recidivism rate for kids that have gone through that program is very similar, if not slightly better than our kids that go through regular diversion. It's been, a program that has good respect in the community. And so we wanted to find a way can we make this program better and expand it? So with our capstone project, we looked at that criteria that I mentioned that with the county attorney's review, and are there things there that we can lessen and lower to let more kids into the program? So a couple things we changed. So like previously, like we said, we targeted assaults and disturbing the peace charges, but let's say a kid hit someone and then actually vandalize something, then they were previously ineligible for the program because they had that vandalism charge on it too. So now we said if they had an assault and like a trespassing assault and like a fail to comply or assault or vandalism, they were now allowed to do the program. We also lessened up some of like if they have been on probation, but they've successfully completed probation and it's been at least 6 months, then they can do this program. So we did a couple of things of just lowering the barriers to let more kids in. And then the other thing we wanted to do with our capstone was to expand how we're getting feedback from kids that have gone through this program. Because we previously, when they were done, we would email or text out a link to a survey, but our response rate was very, very low. And so we didn't really have a lot of feedback. And so we wanted to create an effort to get some good feedback from youth and families. And another part that we also want to do is possibly expand Restore to going even faster to prevent or eliminate or reduce school suspensions for these kids that are eligible for the program, and working with funding a way to be able to accomplish that. So if the kids did this program, that their suspension would either go away or be reduced. So that was our main efforts. And then I want Casey to talk a little bit about what they actually do in the program, because that's Casey's good work that he does.
Yeah, I would say this is the hard stuff for kids. Because when they come to us, a lot of times people just want it to go away. So we meet with them individually first after we get a referral from Laura's office, them and most often the parent, to kind of reflect on what's going on, and what we're working towards is a conference for them to think about. If it happened again, what would I do differently? Is there something I need to pay back in some way? Do I need to say I'm sorry? Am I willing to do that? We want them processing on options of, look, if I want it to go away, what am I going to be able to do differently? Or how can I react differently to what's going on? So sometimes we were able to get the youth together to help make that happen. Sometimes the second party isn't willing to do that, and we kind of create a conference anyway for them to work through those things for them to make it better the next time that it happens. And then we come up with a report that goes back to Laura's office, that gets back to the county attorney. If they think it's all good, then this goes away in some way. And an important part, I think, this project, we were talking about working together. Example would be, how quickly can it happen? What we're discovering is if a kid gets kicked out for 3 weeks, their semester is ruined. So is there a way to get in quicker? And so when we have in our capstone project, someone from the police, hey, how long is stuff on my desk? So a county attorney that is there, how long is it on my desk, and how more quickly can we move it along? The school administrators there trying to decide, hey, what are we willing to do? I think that's how change happens. Now, what we're learning is you got to have the decision makers at each level at the table. So if you could have a police officer, county attorney on okay, but you also probably have to have the principal there besides the administrator. So that we are learning in the midst of all of this. But I think for us, we're very fortunate to have a supportive system that knows we have a lot of work to do. And what I think is also really good is we meet quite often. And so, what's the issue? What are the possible options? What's not working well? It is that continual, this isn't just a project, that was a good idea. It's this, and I think we'll have more projects that will come out of this. So.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for that context. I'd love to dive a little deeper into kind of stakeholder engagement strategies that y'all have implemented. For y'all in New Rochelle, I know you have lots of kind of different balls in the air related to your reform effort. So can you talk a little bit about what stakeholders you've kind of brought together? I know, Nate, you mentioned the police department and schools and a couple of other organizations, but can you talk a little bit more about how you brought all those parties together to kind of come to a common vision for how you wanted to do your work differently moving forward?
As I alluded to, and thank you, Casey, for what you mentioned in regards to having the key players at the table, right? I think in today's world, there's so much reliance upon school to nurture, and support the whole child in every aspect. Because we are fortunate in a school environment to be able to work with students on the average 8 hours a day for 180 days a year. And for some, that's the most engagement that a lot of our kids are having in a concentrated area. So we understood the value of school and what that represented. And from that point, being a part of the Student Support Service Department here in the school district, we were able to, one, gather all of our administrators, as meaning our principals from the middle school and the high school. We work very closely with our guidance department, along with our pupil service department that encompasses our SEL, students, social emotional learning, a lot of our clinicians, psychologists, because many of the students that we're working with, when you back down and look at what's going on with them, a good 50% of them are dealing with IEP challenges, whether it's in some form of SPEDS. A lot of them are coming from traumatic households. So you need more than just this academic space, right? And we're realizing that that's the role that we're playing. So every one of those pieces are at the table when we're looking at the development and working with some of these students. From there, we know that there's a parent component because many of our parents are saying in their own way, I need help, right? Many of our parents come to the table very defensive about some of the conversations we're having about their child. But when you get to the heart of it and say, tell us what you need, the number one answer is, I don't know. Right? They're saying, I need help. And so with Choice of New York, Choice of Westchester, what they've been able to do is develop a whole wellness plan of support around our parents, because it can't just happen in the building. It also is an external resource that needs to take place because our parents want the support. And a lot of it is about coming down and having these parent and student intervention moments because they're not getting the opportunity to communicate what are some of the challenges that they're facing. A lot of it is this transactional mindset that we as adults tend to put towards our children. Do this, go here. This is what you're supposed to do. Wake up. And it's not working anymore. We're dealing with a generation that unfortunately has become the parent of the phone. And the phone is dictating so much to them. So what we're doing now is looking at how all of these systems come together. And this year, in partnership with the city of New Rochelle, we were actually able to find support for employment for many of our students that we're working with. And what we identified in that tier 3 population was many of them were, I call, credit deficient, meaning that they were behind in their academic studies and where they're supposed to be. So we created this program under the support of the city of New Rochelle, and they provided us $50,000 for the summer to create this program called the 5 Senses of Success. And what we did was we started to hone in on the senses that our students are struggling with, right? Feeling success, seeing their future, tasting what quality life looks like, hearing and knowing that their world around them, they're struggling to find a better place for themselves. So through that 5 senses of success, we were able to provide credit rehabilitation. We were able to make sure students were back in school because some of them had dropped out of school. And then from there, we were able to provide them with workforce development training along with essential skills training. And that was very important for 18 students that had been engaging with the police on a high level. What I love about what Nebraska is doing, y'all are really right there in the trenches on that preventative stage. What we found in New Rochelle was that we got high flyers, and we're seeing even with our young ladies, there's a rise in engagement with police with young women of color in our community, and that's rapidly growing. So just in this school year, we've now had to divide the group, and we've identified 18 young ladies that have already created this pathway. So we're working strongly. Come back. I'm sorry, I'm not. I don't have my shade down, so the kids are right here on my door looking at me talk. So, and so, we wanted to really focus on that. But the key to it all is making sure all of these systems are in place, that people are buying in and saying, you know what? We didn't have the time to do it. So for a program like YJET to come in and structure what you need from us, and we've been able to identify key clinicians, psychologists, social workers that are working individually and intentionally just on the population of students that we're providing to them. And from there, we also have a referral from probation, referral from family court, and talking to those parents and cycling in all of these students into this project, into this program. What we're able to do now is create guidance counselors that are working specifically with these students on their caseload, their pathway to graduation, along with summer employment, along with for many of our seniors, what is that next career pathway? Because without a dream, without a future, without goals, many of our students are finding themselves in the streets. I think it's not a secret. I saw a lot of the communities that are listed right now, and just like in New Rochelle, we're dealing with gang violence, we're dealing with gun violence, we're dealing with many students that are unfortunately with the increase of usage of marijuana. That has been another hindrance to the work that we're doing. So working with a lot of those systems around detoxing, supporting them around their social media interactions, those types of trainings have really allowed for us to take this capstone project to another level. But the one thing that we're realizing, bandwidth-wise, the numbers are growing. More and more kids are falling into this pocket. And so I want David to talk a little bit more about what we're doing to now get that other layer of understanding, because everybody doesn't understand this work. As we mentioned in the chat, we talked about DEI, right? And we talked about what people are saying we should or shouldn't do. But guess what? These students deserve to be included in this community. These students deserve, through all the things that they've dealt with, to be able to have an equitable opportunity for success. So yeah, you have a lot of those conversations coming up because all we're doing is intentional work. And unfortunately, in intentional work, that comes under a DEI mindset. So how do we work around that to get some of those community partners to stay on board with this work? I think that's what Councilman Peters is doing in regards to the training, the anti-racism, to get an understanding of where all of this started. This is not brand new. This has history to it. And that's what we're starting to do now as we're starting to funnel through all of the municipalities and all of our partners to understand why we are doing this work.
Absolutely. I really appreciate what you raised kind of around the YJEP team almost being like a bridge between all of these services that youth were getting and kind of connecting everyone together in a really meaningful way. And also y'all's work around making sure you're meeting youth families and communities where they are to provide the services and the information that they need. I think, David, your work around kind of community-based training is really, really great to the points that Nate raised around making sure that everyone within the community that youth live in, go to school in, all of those things have a kind of similar understanding of the issues at hand. And so I don't know if you wanted to add anything about your kind of community education efforts quickly before we get the Lancaster County folks back involved in the conversation.
I can do that. I think I appreciate what Nate was just talking about and how you just framed this question. Because part of my role on this team, and I take this very seriously, is political, right? So as Nate mentioned, there's the collective impact of having been engaged with the on the Board of Education and now as a sitting member on City Council. I kind of emerge with the balcony view in relationship to these things so that I'm not always stuck on the dance floor, because when you're dancing like many of you are, and engaged in moving forward and attempting to get things done, there are some things that politically need to also enter into it, so that the work that Nate and others are attempting to do, that we're creating a safety culture for that to emerge in. So part of this creation of a safety culture when thinking politically is that many of the kids and youth that we're involved in historically oftentimes have inferior housing needs, right? And so part of the cross-system work is to address or begin to put into place a mechanism to kind of change the or improve the environment in which kids live in and families live in and communities exist in and day out. So when we think about anti-racist work, we think about it politically as well. And so in relationship to that, we think about it in terms of what is the impact that has been going on as far as education, also environmentally. So we try to get the community as a whole to understand environmentally how they've been impacted by policies that preceded them, or that they've grown up and lived with or continue to be in now. And so that has to do with being able to access clean water. That has to do with being able to not live in infestation all the time. That has to do with not being in neighborhoods where a highway is running through your neighborhood and you're engulfed in fumes and can't even cross the street to get in the park. There are a lot of different things that emerge that keep people locked into being contained by the environment in which they live in. So we approach anti-racist work and expanding that understanding. We also recognize that anti-racist work is also cultural, meaning that there are different ways in the New Rochelle in which different diverse groups emerge in a way of life that is not the same. You know, we have kids that Nate's describing in particular areas, who their entire existence, they have been on a bus to go into a school miles away from where they live. So their interaction and intersection around historical practices that can only be framed as racist policies because of the segregation associated with that, create ways of life that limit opportunities in relationship to that. And they also enter into spaces and places many times where they may experience not being wanted. So that compounds the situation as well. We also recognize, as Nate talked about when he talked about working with police, that racism emerges in our community militaristically, meaning in relationship to the police and the police legitimacy that needs to be able to emerge in their intersection and interaction with members of the various communities, particularly communities that are Black and brown communities. So with respect to that, that's an area in the community training that becomes a big part of what goes on around understanding the impact of policies and the way in which behavior structurally and institutionally play itself out. We also recognize that it is linguistic, in terms of language, that language is power, and the ability to have a common language around what race is, what racism in particular is, and how it has impacted or limited all individual members becomes a critical part of our work. So our community training is intended to lift the understanding to a common knowledge level so that people can begin to ask more questions as opposed to demanding answers. Because when you work in the political, you kind of want people to have a level of accountability. So we recognize that the accountability frame that we're looking to bring into existence can only have matter for change to occur if that accountability frame is inclusive of those closest to the pain should have more access to the power. And that's what anti-racist work as a framework attempts to bring into existence in a variety of ways of training, community engagement, and outreach.
Thanks, David, for that. I think in your response and Nate's response, I really appreciate the focus on youth, families, and communities really as equal partners throughout all of the aspects of the YJET work. I think that's so important, and something that in CJJR certificate programs, we really try to raise as much as we can. So kudos to y'all on that. I think that's amazing. Related to stakeholder engagement, I do want to turn to the Lancaster County folks. Y'all mentioned you had a lot of the stakeholders at the table already from the origination of Project Restore. So I'd love for y'all to talk about if there was anyone else you had to identify to bring to the table related to Restore's expansion, and kind of what that work has looked like related to getting all of those stakeholders on board related to changing up this program a bit.
So a big part of what has helped us is after they went to the Georgetown program, several years ago, we have a committee in our community, our Racial Ethics Disparities Committee, our RED team, and that meets monthly. And so a lot of the partners have continued to meet to talk about Project Restore and other areas in our community that fall under that category. And so those relationships have continued to grow and develop. And so, and we always invite new people. So until we went to Georgetown, did the certificate program, Casey didn't go to those meetings because we hadn't thought to invite him. But then after he was part of the Georgetown certificate program, he now comes to those meetings, which has been a benefit. And it is also, Lincoln is kind of a unique town, is that we're big enough to have resources and supports, but small enough that we all know each other still. And so we are all on multiple other different communities with each other. So there's a data committee, committee in our community that we meet with, that we partner with the local University of Nebraska, and they look at our data from police department, county attorney data, our diversion data. And then we have regular quarterly meetings with that, where we pull out and look at the data, including looking at, you know, racial and ethnic disparities data. And so when we're all in those meetings and seeing the datas and the discrepancies that show up there, that then leads into what we might talk about at the RED meeting. So just having these, you know, continuing to engage people by having, you know, ongoing work that we're doing. So it's not just a one-time off type of thing, is, I think, been helpful.
Yeah, I'll just lift up some, example would be what we learned is we had kids with ethnic backgrounds that were being suggested into our program that were deciding not to go because it's within the system. And so what we had to do is we partnered with the YWCA person who was part of our capstone project that would be willing to meet with those families for them to explore the advantages of taking advantage of a diversion program instead of getting it into the court system. All of us was like, oh my gosh, this is a great deal. Why wouldn't you decide that? But for people who have been beaten down by the system over and over again, this was another system idea for them to hear. You can take a hold of this project. These are your ideas. These are things that you have to agree to do. And so that was something that we learned within this project that we needed to add, just as another opportunity for youth to see that this could be an advantage for them.
And I'm kind of glad, Casey, you picking up everything that's on my mind as you mentioned about those systems. I see Jenna had asked a question, and Meg had asked a question in regards to the hesitancy of these systems, and the usage of credible messengers is everything, right? That who are the ones that are on the front line messaging or co-signing the work that we're doing. I've been very fortunate that through my journey of work here in the city of New Rochelle, I run the youth football program. I've been a part of the Boys and Girls Club. And so through that journey, I've been able to work with generations upon generations of young men, young women. And so in that, I've been able to develop those credible messengers, but also create credibility for myself that even though I work in the school system, but Coach Nate is there. I know he's going to lead us in the right direction. And then from there, I'm developing more and more young people to become a part of that. And I think every community knows who those credible messengers are. And from that, within the building, I've created an in-school support staff that are young people that are from our teacher aides, our lunch monitors, our security staff, that are all part of our community that have legs beyond the job that they work. And so we're utilizing them also as credible messengers to work with students within the building. So when there are things that they're struggling with, there's a direct one-to-one mentor and or in-school support person that can act as a credible messenger and work with them in those moments. But then the beauty of it is we all live in the same community and can support them as credible messengers outside of the building. So it's this whole wraparound, whole child, whole community mindset that we've been able to develop. So I thank you, Meg, for lifting that, and Jenna as well, because without credibility, without trust, without relationship, none of this work is anything.
Yeah, and Casey, I want to add to what Nate just said, particularly, Casey, when you mentioned that part of your work is engaging where you meet quite frequently, right? That you're not outside of, normal. A lot of times systems and institutions or groups meet, they meet, but they may not, some groups meet once a month, some groups may meet twice a month, It's the same with anti-racist work. Within our community, we've established a community meeting space. We call that New Rochelle Against Racism, but that particular community meeting space occurs every week. It's once a week. So we don't see anti-racist training as an event. We see it as developing a way of thinking and a way of life. And so we intersect with community members throughout the city of New Rochelle in support of the framework of lifting the consciousness around the impact of race and racism within our systems and institutions that affect our youth and our children and others. So frequency of meetings becomes an important thing. We're now 10 years, almost 11 years into the development of an anti-racist framework for understanding that people have access to both virtually and in person every week. So we build on it. So frequency is really important when you're attempting to bring about transformative change.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for that. And I think in all of those responses, y'all really raised up the importance of relationships across systems, relationships with youth, family, and community, and really understanding where everyone is coming to this work from and meeting their needs as you kind of continue to build things out. All right. I think I will turn it to Amber. I think she has some communications related questions as y'all were kind of talking about figuring out who the messenger is and what the message is and how that might differ depending on your audience. So I will turn it to Amber.
Thanks, Christine. And I don't want to take away from this conversation that we're having, but I do want to take a step back. So both teams, y'all had really strong rapport with a diverse set of folks from different systems and families, incredible messengers. But take a step back. How did you get your partners to understand your work and to begin collaborating with you? I would love for both teams to kind of take a step back and thinking through how were you able to share your vision? Does the communication look different depending on who you are talking to? And how were you able to approach this message differently depending on who they are?
I think when
go
go ahead, Nate. No, go ahead.
So I think we were able to take advantage of, well, as I mentioned earlier, our Opportunity Youth Part program that really started to lay the foundation of a lot of this community work that we were doing and the collaboration of different municipalities and different groups coming together. So that was already established with over 30 to 40 partners from the judicial world, from nonprofit world that was supporting this work that we were doing for 18 to 24-year-olds. So what we did was this capstone project really was birthed from that and allowed for us to piggyback off of a lot of the communications and supports that were already established through that, because everybody that was a part of that Opportunity Youth Part, our goal was to not necessarily put that out of business, but to create a preventative way to where those numbers were starting to decrease. We didn't want to see kids or young adults, rising adults interacting with the police at all. So we knew that this YJET project was going to be birthed from this. And then what we were able to do was create this ecosystem of different partners that existed from our municipalities, that came from our OYP program, our YJET program, and then we also have the New Rochelle Community Justice Center that is now working with the 18 to 24-year-old population of students that I call almost like nomads that graduated high school, struggling to really figure out what life looks like, because we know idle time is the devil's workshop. So what we're trying to do is fulfill them with career opportunities, really starting to work with that inner self, and doing a lot of the SEL work with that population. So it creates this whole ecosystem of work that we were able to do. Immediately following our capstone project, we had a huge town hall that we offered to the vast community. And David, I think we had about 50 to 60 stakeholders from all municipalities, police department, probation, city officials, county officials, and we announced this project to everyone with a lot of fanfare. And so we were excited to be able to communicate that way. And now we're working on a quarterly or even biannual newsletter to update a lot of our community partners about the work that we're doing. So one, the development of this ecosystem that builds off of one another, communication through this newsletter of communication, and all the work that we're doing, continually meeting in our siloed subgroups, but coming together as a whole on a biannual basis has been able to help us with the communication and continually working with these partners and understanding the work and what's the next steps as we go down this pathway.
Yeah, I think upon reflection, the other aspect of this is that it's not a straight line. You know, I do want to bring that into existence, right? There are this ecosystem. Sometimes the winds are blowing too hard. Sometimes the water's flowing too strong. Sometimes the actions that the community is dealing with are too heavy. You know, we've had over the last couple of years, just in the city of New Rochelle, we've had another young adult, young black man who was shot and killed by the police in broad daylight in the middle of the black community. There's a lot of turbulence that emerges in that and everything associated with that. And so you can take 2, 3 steps forward, and then you can take 10 steps backwards. So there are a number of different things that can happen. We've had evidence that's, allegedly, has come into being planted and things along these lines. We've had other things that have occurred. We've had, as 18B lawyers in New York State, and particularly now in other places, where youth are not guaranteed to have an attorney throughout their engagement and involvement because we don't have enough attorneys. There are things structurally and institutionally with this particular population that if it was a different population, it perhaps might not have happened that way. So there's a lot of turbulence that comes in. So, our capacity to adapt and to have leadership that is adaptable and able to be able to regulate distress while being able to move forward in terms of holding steady becomes the challenge, right? That's the challenge. But it's a challenge that must be met by our capacity to, upon reflection, to adapt. And so our adaptability becomes another skill set of our moving forward that will probably emerge in our work a little bit more around adaptive leadership and the principles associated with that.
I think that's a great point by David. I would just add on to that of being flexible and knowing when to push, when to back, kind of maintain and stay in the background. So we wanted to do the program of the school to eliminate school suspension. We got some pushback on that. We haven't given up on that because we are still meeting and meet with the partners of our school system, but we understood where they're coming from, and we know maybe now with the current climate, now is not the time to maybe push harder on a program that's fighting for racial justice, but what we're adapting to is focusing on the relationships with the people in those key positions so that when there is a better time to revisit that conversation or push forward, that we still have that connection and the relationships there. Same thing with like our county attorney's office. We're having some different issues with them that we didn't have 2 years ago, but our personal interworking relationship with the county attorney is still very, very good. We do quarterly breakfast with them. We invite him to come to our office, we give him food, and then we air our grievances with him and talk about things. And so even though we don't necessarily get what we want, but the fact that we're still always meeting and talking, and maybe we decide before our breakfast attack sometimes is what thing are we going to focus on that we want to bring up to him at this time, and knowing, okay, maybe now's not the time to talk about this issue. We know it's there, it's on the back burner, but let's focus on this one. And if you keep those relationships going in those meetings, that when things seem a little bit calmer, more there might be a way forward, then you can revisit it. That's being flexible, like David said, is a key part of doing this work sometimes.
And I think Laura's office has been really helpful. It's helpful for me to continue to look at the statistics because it's so obvious. And sometimes when we introduce change, the natural reaction for most people in the room, they're sitting there is, it's okay. What we're doing now, let's just continue doing that, because I've put myself in a place of power within the system where I don't want it to change because I'm sitting here. But then to see the statistics and the stories, to know the work we have to continue to do, it's not something we're going to give up. We're going to have to come at it differently. To me, the opportunity, what this capstone project did is it set aside a large period of time for everybody to look at one another with shaking heads of, well, this is obvious. And so I think we have a bunch of people who committed to continue to do this, even though we're not getting results right away on some of this stuff. I think everybody knows that these are priorities that are going to need to have to happen. So.
If okay, Amber, I see someone had said something in the chat that I wanted to kind of maybe support them with. Meg had mentioned about diversifying some of the support systems that she has in regards to those that are working with their students or some of the diversion programs. And Meg, I would say to answer that question, we have to utilize some of the systems or some of the things that already exist in our communities. I think one of the greatest things that we know a lot of our young boys, especially our Black and brown boys, levitate to are our sports, right? And many of our coaches that are out there, and I attest, I'm kind of doing my PSA for youth coaches. So many of them know a sport, right? And they're very passionate about a sport. But the thing that they don't realize is that they are mentors, that they are, future seekers for so many young people. So if you're struggling with trying to find volunteers or different representation of support around different demographics, go to your youth sports organization teams, because a lot of those young men that are out there volunteering or giving their time would love to go beyond the sport. And that's what I'm doing here in my community, is to elevate the mindset that if you can nurture and work with the young person in a sports realm, you can do it also in a social atmosphere. So look towards some of those opportunities to dig where those kids are, and the individuals that they're already levitated to or looking up to. Utilize what's existing already and go out there, support them, and they'll give it back to you. Because sometimes they don't even know that the opportunity even exists. They only know what they see. So go out there and recruit them in those sports worlds.
I would add on to that with what Nate said, is that we have sort of the same problem with our diversion staff is all white. It's half men, half women. But we partner a lot with our community organizations. So we have cultural centers that we try to do a lot of our diversion programming with community centers that have more diverse staff than our actual diversion staff is. So we can refer kids to work with those programs. So maybe they're much more likely to work with someone that looks like them, and maybe understands their background and their culture more than some of our actual diversion staff. So we worked hard at finding those community partners that we can work with, and working with them on what could they do with our diversion youth that would make sense, and finding ways to build and try to nourish those relationships.
Yeah, I would also add to, I'm not sure geographically where you may be, but there are a number of fraternities that have particularly attended historical Black colleges. And so with respect to that, that expands the mentoring pool and their ability or capacity to be engaged both while in school and upon graduation oftentimes becomes it's an effort of re-engaging with the community in which they have a strong investment. So I would also seek out whether or not any of those Divine Nine, if you will, which they're traditionally called, sororities and fraternities, are within your geographic space that for social capital that you may or may not have thought about before, to reach out to them.
All right, y'all. We are just about at the top of the hour, so I am going to go ahead and bring us to a close. Thank you all for your comments in the chat. This has been an incredible discussion. Thank you to all of our panelists. Your expertise is evident, and we are so grateful at CJJR to be able to lift up y'all as examples of folks who are doing really strong work in this area. So thank you for all that you do and for taking the time to be with us today. For everyone here, if you're interested in engaging in work similar to what's happening in New Rochelle and in Lancaster County, my colleague Natasha just dropped the link to the information for the Advancing Racial Justice and Equity Certificate program in the chat. So please feel free to give that a look. And Amber's email is in that message as well if you have any questions about that program. But thank you all so much again. We'll have this webinar posted on our website soon, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Christina, real quick, can I say one thing?
Please, yeah.
I'm a motivational speaker, so I just gotta say one thing real quick. I just want to thank everybody that's on this call. because love doesn't have color, right? Passion doesn't have a color. And most importantly, understanding that when justice is not being served for certain populations and we know opportunities is not there for a certain population, it takes our heart, mind, and our soul to continue to push forward. And so I want to thank everybody that cared enough to come on this call, but most importantly, that cares enough to do this work. We know what so many of our youth are dealing with, and it takes individuals like us, not like you, not like me, like us, to continue to build a better future, a better country, and better opportunity for so many people in our community. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's stay on the forward field together. It's going to be a fight, but you know what? No weapon formed against us will ever prosper. Thank you all for the work that you're doing in all of your communities. God bless you.
Take care, beautiful people.
Yes, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.